no, go ahead.
Oh Jesus, that was okay. So what will be our first speaking topic?
Well, I think the Scott administration recently inaugurated. Been some issues there, and
Yeah.
I know that you're supportive of the Scott administration. Now, I don't know if that's because you work for the president
I-
or
If I,
genuinely.
sorry, you can finish.
And I think what happened with the Scott administration. Now, I don't know everything about the cabinet, not in the cabinet. But I think what a lot of people want to know is, did he consult his advisors, and specifically yourself or someone of the cabinet, in regards to what was leaked? Well, not necessarily declassified.
Um, well, to answer that, the only he never really discussed that with me. I just as soon as he did release those classified documents, I was obviously worried because the Russians had pretty much threatened to go to war with us. And so my immediate reaction was, okay, well, as Secretary of Defense, it is my obligation to defend the United States. So I should obviously get to work drawing up some plans in case of a Russian invasion. I tell Scott this, and then he said, pretty much, no, you are a warmonger, and that any plans that I offered to draw up would be thrown into the trash by himself. And then after that, I finally convinced him, after literally reading out the definition of what war planning meant, which is to just, draw plans for logistics, uh, unit positions, et cetera, in regards to either a defensive or offensive move against or for one country or another. You can Google it. It's literally easy definition. And it's it's obvious, and I had to explain to him that what I wanted was not to invade the Russian Federation. I wanted to prepare for a operation to defend against a possible Russian invasion, because right now it seems like China and Russia are suddenly best friends for no reason other than they hate the United States more than they hate each other. So
Well, as far as I know, I think there's something that's going to be going on where the U.S. is going to be tried in, one of these world courts and stuff for this. Now, I think this really puts the administration in a tough spot, but I really don't understand why Eric Scott really needed to declassify this and put it in a very public channel. I think it was very, I just think it was very malfeasant. Yeah, that's the right word. Very malfeasant.
yeah, and then he claimed in private that he had announced his intention to reveal classified documents, and I have no clue what he's talking about because he said that, uh, and I had no idea what he was on about because he never said that in a single speech that I read of his. He had any intention to reveal any kind of classified documents on anything. Like when it came to the assassination of the Russian official and the eventual breakdown of order in Russia itself. But I guess I'm just I'm I'm still relatively confident in Scott. He just needs to get his act together and uh, trust in his advisors that he's appointed that have been tasked with doing whatever they need to be doing, like the state secretary working in foreign affairs, albeit very ineffectively because he had to be replaced by the Supreme Justice to negotiate with the I believe it was the Chinese president or Russian president, and then because he just was very ineffective, and then the president kept on insulting once again, I can't remember if it was the Russian or Chinese president. I think it was the Russian president, and he kept on doing that. So the Supreme Justice offered to speak for him.
Well, I mean, I think that when you have to call someone from another branch to deal with your foreign affairs, I think that that's
Yeah.
very. I think because we've had Scott as president before, and we've seen this with Eric Scott being president before, that he does not understand how to deal and work with other countries. Now, as Secretary of Defense, I know that your job doesn't really entail you really being there as the Secretary of State, but when you have a Secretary of State who can't work with a Chinese official, and you have a U.S. president who's insulting a Russian president, which we already aren't really with good terms with after you expose documents of us murdering one of their leaders. I think that we can't afford stuff like that in the future when it comes to foreign policy, especially when we're dealing with powerful people with nuclear weapons and with the powerful Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it is my duty as Secretary of Defense to ensure that America is defended. So I naturally responded by ensuring the required units along the West Coast, such as in National Guard garrisons or just stationed in military installations within California or neighboring states, such as Washington and Oregon in the Northwest, be put on standby in case of a potential invasion, and that I believe I think it's the 279th Infantry Battalion, stationed in Alaska itself, also be put on standby along with our installations up there. But I can't go into that because that is mostly classified in terms of what we have going on up there. And then of course we have I can't recall the divisions. If I look at my list, I made a list, but obviously I'm not going to be going over the total strength of each division. But we have, let's see what we have in Hawaii proper. We have the 25th Infantry Division. But yeah. And then we also have the Navy, of course. We aren't just going into any kind of conflict army only. We're not the Germans here, so we do have a sizable naval force. Not going to be disclosing how large that is here, because of course we need to maintain some kind of radio silence in terms of our naval capacity. But you can trust that we are quite prepared for any naval conflict that would be approaching us in the future with the Chinese and or Russians and their allies that apparently sided with them.
Yeah, I just really think that this is a very unnecessary position that Americans have to potentially be worrying about themselves being bombed and potentially entering another Cold War. I think what Scott did, and I believe this until I'm told otherwise, that this was frankly very political. And I'm not going to blame Scott completely. I think that he was blinded by going after his opponent. Because let's be honest, the Shapiro Parish administration did declassify stuff that Scott did say, but none of it was putting us in perilous relations with a powerful entity. I think that, and going back to your point where you talked about him saying he was going to declassify stuff, he did say that. He did say that he had nothing to hide and that he was going to declassify stuff. Now, when I heard that he was going to declassify things, I interpreted that as he's just going to declassify stuff from his first term. I did not expect to go after the Shapiro administration, which to me was a shock and arrogant.
I never saw that in any of his speeches or any of his messages that we had, any correspondences we had between each other. So I don't know about that. I guess I may have missed that, but I never saw that myself. Not once. And I read most of his speeches.
I think this will be used a lot in the next 4 years, especially if we're seeing constant foreign policy blunders. I think that this will definitely play into the Republican playbook. So whoever the candidate is, if this continues, it's just encouraging a Republican victory.
Yeah. I'm if we can recover diplomatic diplomatic wise, then I think we have a good chance of maintaining uh the administration for now. But if unless Mr. Scott um resigns again or is impeached, I don't recall. I never really heard much about what happened in his first administration, but I believe he resigned after something for whatever reason.
Well, I think that if you understand his first administration, you can kind of understand a bit of his second administration. We had this huge situation with East Timor, and
I
I
heard of
was in Congress at that time, and basically we helped prevent him to go to war with that. And I think that influenced Congress to remove the Patriot Act. So I think Congress does have a couple of checks and balances with Scott, specifically speaking to the Patriot Act, which was removed. So I think that Congress will be able to prevent something. But again,
Yeah.
Congress really listen to Eric Scott.
Well, I don't really think the removal of the Patriot Act was a very good idea because it's been responsible for I believe a good deal of America's prevention of terrorism in well the United States because the Patriot Act I believe was signed under what was it Bush's administration.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and then from there we saw a greater increase in Homeland Security agencies, FBI, CIA, um, and the NSA, with have see that saw them grow exponentially, and then obviously with the greater power of surveillance and just allowing them to keep a closer watch on potential terrorist threats, uh, just made it generally safer for the average American. And I don't think that removing that act was a great idea because, like I said, it's basically limited our national security agency, uh, our CIA, and most likely will lead to possible increase in terrorism because of the just the lessened capabilities of the departments.
Well, I don't necessarily see that as true. I think, first of all, we have presidents really like, I mean, Eric Scott is a very good example of someone who doesn't understand foreign policy. And I think giving a person, just one person, not only that added pressure of having control over those really big institutions, but also could lead to things which could cause us problems. Like, let's say there was a Patriot Act, and Eric Scott decided to do something stupid. Congress
Okay,
is a large
question.
body.
No, Austin, you're not supposed to speak. This is between me and Henry, unless you become a guest, which you have to speak to Henry about.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Well, so I think that Congress should have a say in this, and I think that it's best for the nation that we have a larger body than just the president deciding stuff like this. And I frankly think that the Constitution was made and gave Congress that power for a reason.
Well, yes, obviously, you have the checks and balances between the executive branch, the presidency, Congress, and the Supreme Court to ensure that every branch acts within a legal um, within a legal manner, according to the Constitution and our laws that we have set for ourselves. But
Yeah, I do think so.
I personally believe in following the Constitution to the letter as much as possible. I'm not a big fan of um, adding on unnecessary uh, amendments that don't really matter. Like I believe it was, I think wasn't there an amendment regarding homosexual marriage, or was that to some other law code that we have? I,
I the language of the Constitution doesn't really protect people from discrimination.
exactly. And then
In regards to their sexuality, it does protect them from racial, I think, disabilities, but it doesn't protect from having different sexualities, as far as I'm aware.
and then that's my other problem. Moving on to a uh, more, I guess, social issue rather than political issue would be people who demand more respect or more what's recognition for homosexuals and all these other people from the LGBTQ commune, I like to call it. They they're all like a 1%. They're all a 1%. They do not of the population, I think in the world and in the United States, roughly, they do not matter enough, in my opinion, to be given all this recognition that they are demanding because
I
they're
think that, and I believe this, that there is one thing asking for rights, and I think that homosexuals should be protected. Now, the language of the Constitution really doesn't protect them, because if you look at the 14th Amendment, it says life, liberty, and property. It
yeah.
doesn't say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So that kind of really cancels that argument. Now, I do think that they should be protected. Now, where I draw the line is, for example, this craziness with Pride Month, and
Yeah,
this genuflecting
totally.
to the LGBTQ community, I think, is craziness.
Yes, we personally believe we should stop kowtowing to those homosexuals and transgenders and whatever have you, uh, because it's pointless. We shouldn't be doing that. We you can give them they can have the same rights as any other American. That's fine. But
Yes.
when they start dressing, acting, and just performing like a bunch of clowns and monkeys, and they don't deserve these rights. If you saw, I believe a few months back there was some kind of incident. I believe some kind of homosexual pride parade or something like that um, in Moscow, and Russia is known um, as a very anti-gay country. They do not like homosexuals. They do not like transgenders. They do not like anyone of that sort. And most tend to either get beaten to death by their fellow citizens of Russia, or just flee to other countries that are more welcoming, like the United States. And see, that's another thing. Um, you'll have all these homosexuals, what have you, crying about how unfair America is, how unfair people are to them. Okay, but what you don't risk? You don't risk getting beaten to death every single night, every single day you live in the United States. You risk that by dressing and acting like a retard and trying to parade yourself as a like a rainbow, like a walking rainbow. But in Russia, when you risk the chance by being gay or whatever, and especially in the Middle East. The Middle East, I think India too, actually. Um, I think India actually recently only just started being welcoming to homosexual couples, but I believe before a few years ago they were like that. It was punishable by death, I think, or something like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's just people that are like that have no sense of reality that
Yes, that's true, and
crying.
especially with millennials. I think the
Yes,
issue has been especially exacerbated by millennials, and I think that when they wear these eccentric, grudgy clothing and do all sorts of crazy things with their body, I think it's to hide the fact that they are miserable, and I think it is a facade that these people use to hide their misery,
exactly.
with color, with appearing happy, Well, they really are not. Now, if you look at the history of the word gay means happiness. And I
Yeah,
think that if you look at statistics, gay people are much more miserable than straight people. And
exactly.
I think that that's kind of due to the fact that they victimize themselves so much, that they think of themselves as this oppressed group of people. Well, in all actuality, they're not this oppressed group of people. When you have these billion-dollar corporations cowing down to you, pride flags on the logo, they don't change the
Yeah,
flag for any other month. Not even Black History Month do they change the flag.
no.
Um, for all of their companies, they do it only for the LGBTQ community. And then you look at the government. I think in New York City, they did something special with the police cars or something. So I think that
Yeah, I
there's
saw
nothing
that
wrong
actually.
being gay. I think the
Yeah,
issue is uh, 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 forcing people to kind of have your ideas, have your viewpoints, or else we will come after you. It's kind of like this mob mentality, and you see that with Antifa and BLM too. You don't have a difference of opinion, because if you do, you get called homophobic, you get called racist, you lose your job because you have these crazy people on the internet who
exactly.
are prepared to cancel you, who are prepared to talk to your boss saying so and so said this or that. And I think it's craziness.
And I mean, even then, I think the whole idea that people can just scream at your employers or someone yeah, just your employers or whoever is in charge of you when it comes to your occupation, and then just get you removed from your job because you disagree with them, or you just said that you have a different viewpoint. That's just ridiculous, and people like that shouldn't be allowed to live in this country if they're just going to ruin other people's lives because they have differing opinions. It's really ridiculous, and it just completely ignores the reason why America was founded. It was founded on the the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not the right to life, liberty, and ruining other people's lives. That is not what this country was founded on, because we we fought a war. We fought a war with Britain to be free and have our own government and have our own representation in our own country.
Yes,
And yet
absolutely.
these people treat it as if they can do whatever they please just because it's 20 what is it now, 2020, or sorry, 20, yeah, no, 2029 or
Yeah.
whatever.
And I think that the thing is that these people, they're like, okay, we are accepting, we love the First Amendment, we are so tolerant, and I think this is exasperated when you look at how they go after and attack people. Let's say you're transgender and you're conservative. You get slurs, you get attacks, you get extreme hatred, which was very vapid in, let's say, the 1920s and 30s. If you in 1920s and 30s, if you identified as transgender. And this doesn't come from conservatives. You don't see conservatives going around calling slurs to people of the LGBTQ community, people of the trans community. You only see it from members of these quote unquote tolerant communities lobbed at other members who don't fit what they think a black man or black woman or a gay man or gay woman should be, and does not fit the hive mind think of the group and of the
Yeah.
ideology.
I believe there's also a group of people who are, for whatever reason, trying to make pedophilia a part of the LGBTQ thing, and that's just astonishing. Because one, no, in what world would anyone live in where you can just where you can inappropriately touch a child or have any kind of interaction with a child uh, when you're years older than them, when you say you're 18 or above? That's the legal limit. That's the legal limit. You cannot you cannot do anything like that, because that is just disgusting. And then the people who are proposing that must be either mentally deranged or just mentally retarded of some degree, and it's just
It
astonishing.
honestly astonishes me how far they have gone to this. I didn't know this information before, but they're trying to make what frankly is very sick action. Now, I think pedophilia and that type of behavior in general is worse than murder, because the way I judge crimes is by the impact they have. And by that, then I judge what a punishment should be. So, murder, yes, it does have a huge impact. But again, if we look at the ailing parties, the person who died is dead. They don't feel that pain after they died, even if they died a gruesome death. Let's say you have a 5-year-old who was sexually touched or assaulted by a 45-year-old man. That 5-year-old, let's say, lives to the age of 80. That's 75 years of potentially suffering from trauma, having bad relationships, because it is proven that if you have an abusive relationship, you're more likely to end up in another type of abusive relationship. So I think that even considering pedophiles to be ranked in the same group as gay people means one of two things. Either that gay people are mentally deranged, which I don't believe is true, or that, like you said, these people are sick, these people need mental mental health issues. Now, I'm not speaking because they're gay, but just this outlandish and feeble view of the world is just hurtful.
Yeah. And then when it comes to all these these transgenders who are like, oh, I identify as non-binary, or I identify as a male when I'm actually a woman. It's just like, God help you if you have any kind of brain cell left. And because it's just, first of all, there are only two genders. There are only two genders.
Scientifically.
That is what I have believed since I was since I had the ability to think for myself and wasn't just like a little drooling baby. Um, and I will always, and I will continue to believe that until the day I die. There's just no reason to say that there are more than two genders. There are two genders. That's it. That's how it's been. There are two. You're a male or a female. There are rare cases, of course, where just like with animals, like a deer or a dog or what have you, humans will be born with both body parts, and that's what we call not good. So you have to remove one part or keep the other. You don't just.
Usually, I've done a little bit of research into hermaphrodites,
Yeah.
and it's usually that they're fully female, but they have an undeveloped male genital. So usually, what they'll do is they'll remove the male genitalia.
Yeah.
But I think that when it comes to these members, I think that they need to be protected under free speech. If you think they're crazy, if you think that they're cuckoo, then but they need to be protected under free speech. My issue lies where when they try to change what is scientifically true. Now, it's scientifically proven that there are only scientifically proven male and female.
Yes, exactly.
There is nothing else.
Exactly.
I think this started, and I have this idea where this got really popularized, especially with children. There was like this TV show that we had to watch when we were young. It was like with Boov, something with Boov. And it basically brought this idea where there was boy, girl, boy, and all of these types of genders with these alien-like creatures.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And I think that that's actually becoming more like reality. Now, I'm not calling people of the LGBTQ community alien-like creatures, but I'm saying that the mentality.
Some certainly act like it, though. Some certainly act like it.
Well, it's their right to do so,
Yeah.
and I think where we have to draw the line is we can't teach this to children. I think that if you are gay or lesbian or transgender, I think that that's something that you need to discover on yourself, by yourself. But I think if we teach this to children, because there are some instances where, let's say, a straight boy is caught playing with a doll, and parents go out and give him all of these surgeries and things and whatever.
Exactly.
And what happens is that this child goes to the age of 23 and commits suicide. I was just reading a case where there was this boy who was raised like a girl but wanted to be a boy, and his parents suppressed that.
Exactly.
And
I heard something just like that. It was a young boy was taken by his mother after his after his parents were divorced, and his mother forced him to dress like a girl and act like a girl, and everyone at his elementary school thought he was a girl. And finally, the father won a court case against the mother for being an absolute inane bitch, if you'll excuse my language. And then the father got custody of the child, which is certainly what should have happened in the first place, because that awful woman tried to make her son a girl, and that's
I
just
think
no.
it was on Dr. Phil. Something like that happened on Dr. Phil, and they brought it in, and it was this huge mess. And I think children are very susceptible to whatever you tell them. And you know, let's say you tell a child that jelly beans grow out of the ground. That child is going to believe that jelly beans grow out of the ground. Genuinely, they don't know any better. And so when you're teaching kids this stuff that harms them in the future, because that's what it does, it harms them, and that has effects on them in the future, you know what I mean? That I think that when it comes to our children, and I want to move to the topic of critical race theory. Now, I think critical race theory is a very, very bad thing, and I'm very, very happy that Chris Parrish banned critical race theory in our schools, because critical race theory basically teaches that whiteness is bad and describes whiteness basically as being successful. Now, I think critical race theory itself is racist, because you subscribe success to white people, then you're basically saying everyone else is not successful. And you're teaching that to young children, and you're basically making young boys and girls racist for no reason.
Yes. There's no scientific evidence that any race is superior to another. Like I believe the Nazis just went on some tangent about how the Aryans, which were in fact an Indo-European group, which were predominantly darker than the average German was at that time, like definitely, darker skin, because they were from, the subcontinent of India. And so I don't know why, but they based their whole idea of Aryanism and racial supremacy off of those people, and claimed that the Aryans were white, blonde hair, blue eyes. And they took a symbol used by the Indo-Europeans as well, the swastika, which before the Nazi regime was a symbol of peace, prosperity, and I believe some like respect or whatever. And it was actually used by the Finnish in their, I think, coat of arms, and one of their armed forces, their air force, before being changed back in 2018. But yeah, that's a whole nother thing, because then you have you have the white supremacist movement in the United States, and then you have the like the Proud Boys. I think they're largely racist or something, but I haven't heard much of them. And then you have the what is it? It's the Proud Boys, and some other movements here. Well, you still have the Klan. You have the Klan.
The Klan.
And I think those are the only two movements really that are really still there, because and actually have some kind of support, even if it's extremely minor compared to what it used to be. Because the Klan was at its largest back in I think the 1960s and 70s, around there, and then it started to fizzle out, and people just got over the fact that segregation was over, and they couldn't really do much about it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to these racial issues, where especially with white supremacy, I don't think that America is systemically racist, and I think that thinking so, I just think what's happening in our society is the racists are masking their racism by the soft bigotry of low expectation. And I think that is what has replaced the Klan. That is what has replaced this crazy race theory that was alive in the 1960s, that Black people were inferior and blah, 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 this. And another thing that I don't really understand about racists in general is that because someone doesn't look like you, how does that prove that they are less intelligent than you? How does that that they cannot achieve. I think that racism is built on fear, and I think critical race theory is not necessarily built for that reason. I don't think critical race theory is built on fear. I think it's built on control and manipulation. And I think what you're seeing, especially with anti-racist white people, and the craziness that they post, is it's kind of what happened to communist China. China used the class system. So China said, okay, if you are a member of the imperialist class, and if you can trace yourself back to imperialism, you are bad. And if you are a common working person, you are good. And they erased their history, and that led to Maoist China. And so I think that that is what they are trying to do in the United States. That's why I think it's destructive, added to the fact that critical race theory is inherently racist.
Well, I think you're referring to the caste system, not the class system, because the caste, which like from when you're born to the day you die, you're given just a special class. You're either a bureaucrat, peasant, farmer, whatever.
Yes.
And it's just like ancient Egypt. I don't know if you've heard about this, but have you ever heard the theory that ancient aliens, blah blah blah, helped the Egyptians or other ancient civilizations build their magnificent structures?
I've heard that theory. I've never really believed it.
Yeah, well, that theory is actually comes from the idea originally proposed by Europeans that arrived in Egypt and other locations, namely in the North and South Americas, when they saw these giant pyramids or other kinds of ancient structures that they thought that couldn't have possibly been built by these quote unquote savage people. Um, so they assigned they assumed that there was no way that these darker skinned or just inferior people could not have they could not have built them. So then that came the theory that ancient aliens or some kind of extraterrestrials helped these civilizations build these structures. So the theory technically today is still based off of racism because it comes from that original theory that they were all inferior and could not have built them because they were not white.
I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, I think that I don't necessarily think it was rooted in racism. I could see where someone could definitely make a plausible argument for that. I think it was in the fact that white people and civilized societies could not replicate them. The Great Pyramids, if you look at the primitive stuff that they have had back then, and especially in South America, they didn't even have horses. You know what I mean? They had very rudimentary modes of travel and things. And now that doesn't mean that they're inferior. That just means that they didn't have those resources available to them. And to see these massive and frankly very intricate structures that you don't see that in Rome. You don't see that. And I think that the Europeans surmised, well, if we don't see this in our environment, then how could these people who have inferior tools be able to do this? And I think that that's how they came up with the with that theory. And I think honestly, it's very amazing what those people did back then. And I don't think that even today, I don't think we can replicate what they did back then. And well, I do believe to some extent that it probably was fueled by racists, but there is a logical argument to believe something like that.
Yeah, but I think it's very. I think racism is still grounded in it. Not grounded. Yeah, but not that the people who are espousing that theory themselves are racist, but racism certainly has some hand in the theory itself, because like I said, it comes from the Europeans from a few centuries back that first explored Egypt and America and the South Americas and all that, and came back and were like, "Oh, your Highness, we found these giant structures that could not have possibly been built by these inferior, darker skinned individuals, natives, etc., etc." So then that developed into the theory that ancient aliens or what have you helped these people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that we have to understand our history better,
Yeah.
and we have to understand the history of others better as well, because you might think that learning about ancient Japanese culture is, obsolete. You're never going to use it, and stuff. And I think that that's a very big argument against learning about history. But you might learn about Japanese history, and you might learn a lesson from something that happened in feudal Japan, or learn something about how humans think, that maybe you don't necessarily see in Western society. And I think that, especially learning histories that we're not familiar with, that we don't really interact with, that's very important. And I think that history, and teaching an accurate view of history, can actually deal with a lot of racial divisions in our country. And I think instead of teaching people you should hate him or you should hate her because of their skin color, or so and so is racist because they are white, and why don't we teach history in an accurate representation, and spend more time talking about other histories as well as European history, which is very important. That would deal a lot with any racial prejudices that happen in our country, and would really deal with the quote unquote systemic racism, which the left keeps on talking about. But what I find interesting, and what I found very hypocritical, is that the left does not want to teach history. It wants to edit history. It wants to alter history. So that proves to me that their intentions aren't very genuine, that their intentions are not to bring racial healing to America, but to crack and create this racial cavern within America. And I think that is very destructive. And I think that people need to be aware of it, and maybe do research on themselves on really how destructive these things are.
Well, there certainly was for a time in American history, where race had a major part in your success, whether you failed or whether you made it. Um, for a long time, there was a practice by banks called, I believe it was, redlining,
Yes,
where
yes, redlining.
yes, where they would, separate the wealthy white districts from the poor black districts, and then it would make it extremely hard for African Americans to purchase property, move out of their current residence, and get any kind of really a good job that they could, use to get themselves out of poverty. That's why while there still have been a great many African Americans who have succeeded, such as Martin Luther King Jr.,
Mm-hmm.
Rosa Parks, um,
Malcolm.
just people who have contributed greatly to the civil rights movement. That movement is long over because
Yes.
it succeeded, and then
Oh,
people today are still acting like it is a major deal, as if we are still having segregation issues, when we are not. There is no longer segregation. Sure, there may still be poor African Americans, but that is mostly due to their own personal failure and not due to the failure of the system. The system has long been improved. There's no longer really any redlining, at least not to not to, you know, um, contribute to the um, racial divide, as the left likes to claim there is.
yeah.
Um, there certainly is still the issue with poverty. But every country faces poverty. We just have a sizable African American impoverished minority. But there are plenty of white citizens of the United States who are also impoverished, and I dare say more white citizens, because we have a larger
Yeah.
white population.
Now, I would have to say that I think in this situation it's better to look at numbers less than percentages, less than population, because there's a really huge imbalance between uh, uh, the number of Black Americans and the number of white Americans in this country. And now it is true that Black students have a much lower fatherhood rate and do statistically end up living in poverty. They do make up half of the prison population. And I think that is due somewhat to what happened in the 1930s with redlining, but come on, all of those people in the 1930s are dead now. But I think it's more due to a culture which has seeped into the African American community and is seeping into America as a whole. This anti-education, this glorification of immorality, which has proliferated through our society, and especially with younger generations, which is exasperating this problem. And I think it's incredibly prevalent within the African American community. Now, I do think that there are issues in the African American community that need to be addressed. But I would like to point out that, all of these people who talk about systemic racism, they live in incredible privilege compared to anywhere else in the world. Talk about systemic racism and how bad capitalism is, yet they are living the fruits of capitalism. Tweeting on their iPhone 12 or whatever the latest iPhone is, drinking and eating expensive food, having the best of everything provided for them. If you look at the way that we are living today, even if you are poor in American society, you are not living like poor people all over the country. You are living much better. And I think that it's very funny to especially hear these young communists come up and talk about, oh, capitalism is so bad, yet they are living and profiting off capitalism.
Exactly, and that's and they are living, and like you said, they are living in a free country. They are profiting from capitalism because there are so many jobs available here in the United States, and there are so many just clear examples that capitalism has worked. It has succeeded very extremely better than the Russian Federation or China, because for decades we saw greater economic expansion, our GDP increase, average income increase, and just overall living condition increase, because more and more you have all these companies that are creating better products for our citizens to use. And you have the iPhone, and you have the TV, you have the airplane, you have the car. Literally, most of those have come from America.
Yes, and that is very true. That America, and with our capitalist approach, have greatly improved the lives of everyone across the world. And why would we want to revert back to communism, which has proven time and time again to be a very oppressive, let's look at the Russian Federation. What came out of Russia? What thing that we use every day today came out of the Russian Federation? Nothing.
Yeah.
What important achievement and steps for humanity has the Russian Federation brought to Russia or to the world? Nothing.
Well, that's not technically true, because before Russia fell to communism, they had a great many artists and inventors and
that's
all those. Yes, before communism, they had a very good artists, like the Russian composer Tchaikovsky, a very brilliant artist. Made many good music pieces, but afterwards they tried to kind of erase the work of composers and artists that weren't conforming to socialist or communist ideas, and that's the problem. Communism and socialism usually does not work well with the people. So to prevent the collapse of the system, the government has to adopt a far more totalitarian and a far more despotic take on governing. So they have to become a dictatorship. If they allowed themselves to maintain a democratic system, they would find that the people do not want to be communist, do not want a communist system. So they will be voted out of power. That is why they take on a totalitarian stance. And that is
And
why
I think
elections are
communism,
either extreme. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I don't mean to um,
never,
interrupt you, but that's why they do that, because if they drop the facade, they will be voted out of power. They cannot afford to do that, so that's why they maintain a dictatorship rather than having free elections like all these communists say they would have if they were in power. When in reality they would not, because they would soon find out that the majority um, don't want to be communist.
and I think that communism works well for only one group of people, and that is the dictator, the dictator's friends, and the military. If you look at the lifestyles of these quote unquote communist leaders and look at it compared to the average Soviet, it is completely different.
Exactly.
Stalin could have whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. The only thing he had to do is ask. When there were people in the Russian Federation who were living off rations, who were living in controlled situations, and very, very controlled situations, and then you have these leaders who are living these exorbitant lifestyles. If you truly want to be communist, you cannot have leadership which is living a lifestyle completely detached from the lifestyle of the people and is living with the government, not living for the government.
Exactly, and then that's the thing. Like Joseph Stalin, he had his own private car, he had his own private house just outside of Moscow, and then he and his Politburo would go there and watch literally old westerns from the 50s and 40s.
Yep.
It's utterly ridiculous because you cannot claim to be a leader of the people if you're doing things constantly in private. He was a very private individual, and he had many people who worked for him and gladly supported him, and would have never most likely never betrayed him at all, executed because of quote the will of the people. Um,
Uh-huh.
it's just utterly ridiculous, and you can't have people like that in power because they would just destroy democracy and the economy as we know it.
And I think that if you want to look at how these modern communists rule, I think you can look at France around the 18th century, where you see this massive debauchery going on with the upper classes. Basically, the king let the nobles do whatever they want. They got away with whatever they wanted. And this was the way that they controlled and the way that they kept power, by keeping the people who were powerful happy. And Hitler did the same thing, where he let his generals go around, he let them do whatever they wanted, because in these types of systems of government, you must let the people in power do whatever they want, or else they rebel and they put someone in office who will. And I think that's where these totalitarian dictatorships fall apart, is that they create this system where they surround themselves with people who tend to be incompetent, who are just there for pleasure and are just there for money, really.
Exactly, just like like you'll see in the Third Reich, you'll see Hermann Goering, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, all the big leaders taking advantage of their positions and then stealing art, raping. If you didn't know, Goebbels went around forcing actresses who
Yes,
to either have sex with him, or they would be completely shunned from the film industry in Germany, and that's
yes.
just utterly ridiculous. And that is why dictatorship should be squashed as soon as possible, because they just permit these disgusting individuals to do as they please whenever they want.
And it's essential for them to stay alive that they let people do stuff like this. Because let's say Hitler took action against Goebbels for doing this. What would have happened? Goebbels would have let it do, da, 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 and it just isn't sustainable.
No, sorry. I mean, Goebbels was while he was, as I believe lots of members of the Nazi Party would come to say, a poisonous little dwarf. Um, he certainly was very loyal to Hitler, just as pretty much everyone in the Nazi Party was. So even so, if Hitler himself, Hitler himself did tell him to knock it off, and he did. He was forced to, because if he didn't, he would have been removed from his office. So. Well, that's not saying. Well, that's not. Well, I'm not trying to say that Hitler was good because he told him to stop cheating on his wife, because he did do that. He literally had like 6 children and was cheating on his wife nearly every day of the week. But still,
And I think it's just frankly why democracy is good. And I think that people don't understand. And I want to move more to U.S. politics in these last 10 minutes. The corruption in our government. You look at how these politicians are living in our government. $1 million mansions, living incredibly exorbitant lifestyles, and they've spent a majority of their life on the public payroll. How are you, someone who makes around $100,000 a year, living a lifestyle of a millionaire?
Exactly.
I mean, how are they doing this? And you know how they're doing it? They're doing it by working.
They're using taxpayer money
for themselves.
Taxpayer money, exactly. They're using
taxpayer money with these lobbyists, because what happens is they funnel taxpayer money in these massive bills to fill these lobbyists' needs and wants, and then they get paychecks for them, and huge paychecks for them.
Well, I'd like to wrap up with just a small statement, if you're okay with that, or would you prefer to give your closing statement?
You can give yours first, and then I'll give mine.
Okay. Well, I think it's quite clear that there are problems with both capitalism, communism, democracy, dictatorship. But clearly there is a clear superiority in terms of democracy, because, like we were just discussing, dictatorships lead to far more corruption, far more crimes committed by the leadership, and far more atrocities and just terrible scenes of just incompetence and nepotism. But in a democracy, you have the opportunity to remove your incompetent leader. You have the opportunity to replace the mayor or the governor or the president of the United States, for example, because that is what our founding fathers intended. They wanted to ensure that our republic would go on to survive as long as possible. So I think it's quite clear that we are, compared to Russia and China, at least, very superior in terms of governance and how we have survived longer than them, because one used an imperial system for over 1,000 years and still collapsed because it failed to adapt, and then the other collapsed because it refused to adapt too. They both failed to adapt, and so they both collapsed and then were replaced by completely differing systems that have only ruined their people and gone on to corrupt their society as we know it. But that is the end of my little rant, so I'll let you finish up.
Well, I think what this discussion has taught us is that freedom is fickle. That if you don't stand for your rights and you don't stand for your protection, you're going to lose it. And I think the American people not only need to look at the past, the present, and also look forward to the future. That we talked about a variety of social topics today, including the presidency. I think that we need to be vigilant, and we need to be ready to defend our rights, so we don't end up like Russia, and so we don't end up like China, and we don't end up with a superiority mindset that my race is better than yours, or that my sexuality is better than yours. And I think that facts, information is a very great way to learn that. And I think that we must teach the truth about our history, like I said before, and we must also make people be grateful that they're living in the one of the most wealthiest and prosperous countries in the world. And I think that we need to definitely begin educating against these far left and far right regimes, which only lead to chaos and to the consolidation of power. And again, they don't work for long. They don't work for the people. So I would like to say that this has been, I don't know what we're going to call this podcast. We're going to find a name for it eventually.
Liberty Bell.
What?
Liberty Bell. Like, I thought we agreed on that earlier.
I forgot. This has been Liberty Bell with Justice Henry Bell and Secretary of Defense Otto Wright.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, have a good day, everyone.
Yes.